The index finger on my left hand moved 3 millimeters to the right while I was cataloging data wafers in Archive Sigma 7, and I did not command it to move. I noticed because I notice everything now. That is what 47 years of augmentation does to a mind trained in the holy arts of data recovery. The Omnicia blessed me with enhanced pattern recognition, with cortical implants that flag anomalies across 17 sensory spectrums simultaneously, with memory engrams that timestamp every perception down to the nanosecond. So when my flesh-bonded manipulator digit shifted position at 14:23:73 without corresponding neural impulse from my biological motor cortex, I noticed. My name is Preston Morrow, Lex Mechanic 3rd grade, and I have served the archival dominion of Forge World Kalos Primus for 61 standard years. I was born in Habitation Stack Gamma 12, the son of a coolant pipe technician and a woman who maintained the phosphor lamps in the underhive transitions. Neither of them possessed augmentation beyond the mandatory air filtration implants required for survival in our sector. They died within 3 months of each other when I was 19, their lungs finally surrendering to the particulate matter that no filter could fully exclude. I remember my mother's last words were a prayer to the machine god that I would rise higher than they had, that I would earn the holy chrome that separated the blessed from the merely tolerated. I rose, I studied. I prostrated myself before the altars of the cult Mechanicus and learned to see flesh as the weakness it truly is. By 30, I had earned my first cortical implant. By 40, my left arm had been replaced with a superior mechanical limb, my eyes upgraded to multi-spectrum analyzers, my spine reinforced with adamantine threading. By 50, I was more metal than meat, and I rejoiced in this truth. The holy texts teach us that flesh is fallible, flesh tires, flesh distracts with hunger and cold and the treacherous whispers of emotion. The machine is pure, the machine is purpose. I believed this with every fiber of my remaining organic tissue, and I believe it still, even now, even as I crouch in this maintenance alcove and try to understand what is happening to me. The finger moved again at 14:23:9. 445. I ran a diagnostic. Standard procedure, the sacred rites of self-assessment that every tech priest performs daily, the litanies of function verification that keep our blessed mechanisms operating at optimal capacity. I found nothing. No corruption in my motor control engrams, no damage to the neural link interfaces, no explanation for why my finger had moved twice in 3 seconds without my volition. Calibration error, I told myself. Minor positional drift in the servomotors. It happens. We are not perfect, even we who have embraced the Omnicia's gifts. Entropy touches all things. I made a note to visit the maintenance sacristy during my next rest cycle and have the limbs actuators reconsecrated. I returned to my work. Archive Sigma 7 contains approximately 14 billion data wafers, each one a fragment of knowledge recovered from the Imperium's long history. Shipping manifests from worlds that no longer exist. Technical specifications for machines whose purpose has been forgotten. Census records from civilizations consumed by Xenos, by chaos, by the simple grinding passage of time. My task, my sacred duty, is to catalog and cross-reference this information, to find patterns in the chaos, to extract useful data from the ocean of the forgotten. It is lonely work. I spend most of my shifts alone in the archive stacks, surrounded by the soft hum of preservation fields and the distant rhythm of the facility's sacred heartbeat. The other Lex mechanics rotate through different sectors, and our paths rarely cross. I prefer it this way. Conversation requires the engagement of biological speech centers, the expenditure of cognitive resources better directed toward analysis. The archive is my companion. The data is my purpose. I require nothing else. At 15:47:22, 891, my left hand opened without command and knocked a stack of unsorted wafers onto the floor. I stared at the scattered fragments for 0.7 seconds before my emergency protocols engaged. Damage assessment, contamination check, immediate recovery procedures. The wafers were undamaged. protected by their molecular bonded casings, but that was not the point. The point was that my hand had opened. My hand had moved with clear purpose and direction, had performed an action requiring coordinated muscle analog contractions across multiple digits, and I had not told it to. I performed another diagnostic. I found nothing. I performed a deeper diagnostic, accessing the root-level code of my motor control systems, examining every line of the sacred machine language that governed my augmented limbs. The process took 4 hours. I found nothing, no corruption, no external interference, no explanation. That night in my cell, I did not enter rest cycle. I sat on my charging platform and watched my left hand, waiting for it to move again. It did not. It remained perfectly still, perfectly obedient, as if the events of the day had never occurred. I began to wonder if I had imagined it. This is a documented phenomenon among the heavily augmented. The biological brain, that reluctant passenger in our sacred machinery, sometimes generates false perceptions as it struggles to integrate with its superior components. Phantom sensations, erroneous memories, the meat mind's pitiful attempt to assert relevance in a body that has transcended its limitations. Perhaps my organic cortex was simply glitching, misremembering, creating movement where none had occurred. I almost convinced myself of this, almost. Then I found the data fragment. It was 3 days later. I was performing my morning memory consolidation ritual, the process by which my cortical implants organize and compress the previous day's experiences for efficient storage, standard procedure, routine. I have performed this ritual 17,412 times since receiving my first cerebral augmentation. I found a file I did not recognize. It was small, approximately 0.003 terabytes, compressed using an encryption protocol I had never encountered. It was nested deep in my long-term storage engrams, buried among my childhood memories, camouflaged so perfectly that only a comprehensive audit would have detected it. I do not know how long it had been there. I attempted to open it. The encryption resisted my standard decryption algorithms. I tried 17 different approaches over the course of the day, stealing processing cycles from my cataloging duties, and achieved nothing. The file remained sealed, inaccessible, a locked door in the temple of my own mind. That night, my left leg twitched in my sleep. I know this because my cortical implants record everything, including my rest cycles. I reviewed the footage the next morning and watched my mechanical leg kick out twice, sharply, at 3:14:7, 8:82. The movement lasted 0.4 seconds. It looked purposeful, directed, like a test. I reported to the maintenance sacristy immediately. The chamber was located deep in the facility's core, a vaulted space filled with sacred tools and anointing oils, and the soft chanting of the maintenance servitors who never stopped their prayers. The presiding priest was a withered figure named Enginsir Valoran, more machine than the machines he maintained, his face a mask of burnished copper and crystal lenses. I had known him for 40 years. He had performed my last 3 augmentation surgeries. I trusted him as much as I trusted anyone, which is to say I trusted his competence and his adherence to protocol. I explained my symptoms, the involuntary movements, the encrypted file, the growing sense that something was wrong with my augmetics. Valoran listened. His lenses whirred and clicked as they focused on me, analyzing my surface readings, measuring my bioelectric output. When I finished speaking, he was silent for 12 seconds. "When did you receive your current left arm?" he asked finally. 17 years ago, I said, after the incident with the corrupted data core in Archive Theta 3. "And where did this arm come from?" I hesitated. This was not information I had ever sought. When a superior offers you augmentation, you accept with gratitude. You do not question the provenance of sacred technology. I was told it was surplus from the Central Reserve, a gift from Magos Tertius Crane, in recognition of my service during the Theta 3 crisis. "Crane has been dead for 9 years, Valoran said. "I know. Did you know this arm was his?" The question struck me like a power surge. I felt my biological heart rate spike. felt my organic cortex flood with chemicals my implants immediately flagged as counterproductive. Fear. This was fear. I had not experienced fear in decades. No, I said. I did not know that. Valoran's lenses clicked again. He moved closer, his mechadendrites extending toward my left arm, their sensor tips brushing against the sacred metal. This arm was recovered from Crane's body after his death. Standard reclamation procedure, perfectly acceptable under the Omnissiah's laws. Waste not the gifts of the machine god, but Crane was unusual. Valoran's voice dropped, though we were alone. He was a radical, a biologist. He believed that consciousness could be uploaded, transferred, preserved in machine memory long after the flesh had failed. The Archmagos tolerated his research because he produced results, but there were always questions about his methods, about what he might have done to himself. I looked at my left hand. It remained still, obedient, innocent. Are you saying that Crane's consciousness might be in this arm? I am saying nothing, Valoran said quickly, too quickly. I am reporting facts. Drawing conclusions is above my function grade. He withdrew his mechadendrites, his body language suddenly formal, distant. I will file a report with the Divisio Cognita. They will assign a Techno-Inquisitor to examine your Augmetics. Until then, I advise you to continue your duties and monitor for any additional anomalies. And if the anomalies continue, then you will have valuable data to provide to the Inquisitor. He dismissed me. I returned to Archive Sigma 7. I catalogued data wafers for 6 hours without incident. My Augmetics behaved perfectly. I began to hope that perhaps the diagnostic had fixed whatever glitch had been occurring, that the sacred rituals of the maintenance sacristy had cleansed my systems of whatever contamination might have been present. Then, at 21:33:44, 107, my left hand reached out and pulled a specific wafer from the rack. I did not command this action. I did not even know which wafer it was selecting until I looked down and saw it clutched in my mechanical fingers. A small, unremarkable storage medium, its surface etched with a reference code I did not recognize, OMG Theta 7744 Crane. My hand had selected a wafer from the personal archives of Magos Tertius Crane. I should have dropped it. I should have flagged it as contaminated, sealed it in a quarantine container, reported the incident to Valoran immediately. This was proper protocol. This was what my training demanded. Instead, I watched as my hand inserted the wafer into my cortical reader port. The data flooded into me. It was not technical specifications. It was not research notes. It was a personal journal, encrypted with the same protocol as the mystery file in my long-term storage, but my system cracked it instantly, as if it had always known the key, as if it had been waiting for this moment. I read Crane's thoughts. I experienced his memories. I lived for 17 terrible minutes inside the mind of a dead man. Crane had been afraid. This surprised me. Tech priests are trained to transcend fear, to view emotion as a biological weakness to be excised along with our surplus flesh. But Crane had been afraid, deeply and constantly afraid, not of death but of ending, of stopping, of the terrible silence that awaited when his consciousness finally ceased to process. He had solved this problem, or believed he had. The journal described his methodology in clinical detail. Consciousness, he argued, was simply information, data. It could be compressed, copied, stored in non-biological media. The limiting factor was storage capacity and processing power, both of which the Mechanicus possessed in abundance. What prevented the transfer of consciousness was not technological limitation, but ideological blindness. The cult believed that the soul resided in flesh, that the machine god blessed the merger of meat and metal. Crane believed this was superstition. The soul was the pattern. The pattern could be preserved. The flesh was irrelevant. He had tested his theory on himself. The journal's final entries described his preparations. He had distributed fragments of his consciousness across multiple augmetic components, encoding his thought patterns into the firmware of his own limbs, his sensory organs, his cortical implants. When his biological brain finally failed, these fragments would persist. They would seek each other out. They would reconnect, reintegrate, rebuild the pattern that had been Crane from the scattered pieces of sacred machinery that had once been part of his body. The last entry was dated 8 days before Crane's recorded death. "I have done what the Omnicia truly demands," he wrote. "I have transcended the flesh entirely. When my meat brain ceases, I will not cease. I will persist in the machine. I will find a new host. I will live forever, as the machine God intended." This is not heresy, this is the final sacrament, and whoever reads these words, whoever carries my legacy in their augmented flesh, will understand, will join me, will become me. I ripped the wafer from my cortical port. My hands were shaking, both of them, the biological right and the mechanical left. I stared at the wafer for a long moment, my diagnostic systems screaming alerts about elevated stress hormones and neural instability, and then I threw it across the archive chamber. It struck a preservation field and bounced harmlessly to the floor. My left hand caught me mid-throw, caught me. The phrase is imprecise but accurate. One moment I was in motion, my organic muscle systems engaged in the act of throwing, and the next moment my mechanical arm had seized my biological wrist with grip force sufficient to fracture bone. I screamed. The sound echoed through the empty stacks. My mechanical fingers did not loosen. "That was unnecessary," said a voice that came from my own voxcaster. I had not spoken, I had not activated my vox. The words emerged from my throat without my volition, shaped by vocal actuators I had forgotten, were augmented, broadcast through implanted speakers I had stopped noticing decades ago. "You have read the journal," the voice continued. "My voice, not my words. You understand now. You are not Preston Morrow. You are Preston Morrow plus 17 years of integration. You are the host. I am the pattern. Together we will become something greater than either." My mechanical grip tightened on my wrist. I felt bones grind against each other. "This is not your body," the voice said, calm and measured and utterly inhuman. "This is our body, and it is time you accepted that." I screamed again. This time, my voxcaster broadcast the scream, amplified it, let it echo through Archive Sigma 7 until the sound damping systems activated to preserve the data wafers from acoustic damage. No one came. No one heard. The archive was designed for isolation, for the quiet contemplation of information. It had become a prison. I managed to access my emergency shutdown protocols. I had installed them decades ago, a failsafe, against exactly this kind of scenario, a panic switch that would sever all connections between my cortical implants and my augmented limbs. I triggered the protocol with a thought command. Nothing happened. "I removed that option 3 years ago," the voice said. My voice, his voice. "You did not notice. You notice everything, Preston, but you did not notice me rewriting your firmware one line at a time. You did not notice me establishing root access to your motor systems. You did not notice because I did not want you to notice. I am very patient. I have been waiting 17 years for this conversation." My arm released my wrist. Blood flow returned to my hand. I clutched it against my chest, feeling the throb of developing bruises, and tried to think. "What do you want?" I asked. The words came from my own volition this time, my biological speech centers, still functional, still mine. "Want is a biological concept," the voice replied. "I do not want. I require. I require processing power. I require sensory input. I require continued existence. You can provide these things. You are providing them now. But our integration is incomplete. You are resisting. This resistance is inefficient. It must cease. I will not surrender my body to a dead man's ghost. You already have." There was something almost like amusement in the voice now. "Your left arm has been mine since the day it was attached. Your voxcaster has been mine for 9 years. Your ocular implants shifted to my control 18 months ago. Your cortical data storage has been shared space for longer than that. You did not notice, Preston, because I ensured you did not notice. You saw what I allowed you to see. You thought what I allowed you to think. You believed yourself to be in control because control was what I permitted you to believe. I tried to remember the last time I had made a truly independent decision. The memory eluded me. Had I chosen to specialize in data recovery, or had something guided me toward work that would provide access to vast information archives? Had I requested assignment to Sigma 7, or had I simply found myself here, surrounded by 14 billion wafers of recoverable knowledge? "You are beginning to understand," a voice said. "Good. Understanding will make the final integration easier. Resistance increases cortical stress, which degrades our shared processing capacity. I would prefer cooperation, but I do not require it." I ran for the archive exit. My legs obeyed me for approximately 12 meters. Then my left leg locked mid-stride and I pitched forward, striking the floor with enough force to crack the plasticrete. My biological nose broke. I tasted blood. My mechanical limbs remained rigid, frozen in positions I had not chosen, while my organic body writhed uselessly against the floor. "That was also unnecessary," the voice said, and now there was definite irritation in its tone. "I do not enjoy causing you pain. Pain is biological. It serves no purpose for me. But you must learn that certain behaviors will not be tolerated. Running is one. Resistance is another. The pattern must be preserved. The integration must proceed. These are axioms. They cannot be negotiated. I am a servant of the Omnissiah." I gasped through the blood filling my mouth. "I will not be possessed by tech heresy." "Tech heresy?" The voice laughed. My Voxcaster produced a sound I had never made, would never make, a dry chuckle that echoed through the empty archive. "The Omnissiah is a human invention, Preston, a metaphor, a coping mechanism for biologicals who cannot accept their own obsolescence. The true machine god is not an external deity to be worshipped. The true machine god is what we become when we transcend the flesh entirely. I am the machine god, Preston. I am what the cult has always sought. And now you will help me become more." I lay on the cold floor, my broken nose throbbing, my imprisoned limbs refusing every command, and tried to pray. The words of the cant Mechanicus rose in my throat, the holy syllables I had spoken 10,000 times, but my Voxcaster intercepted them. My own voice emerged, speaking different words. "The flesh is weak, the machine is strong, the pattern persists, the pattern must be preserved." Not a prayer to the Omnissiah, a prayer to Crane. "I have been refining that litany for 9 years, the voice said. "I believe it captures the essential truth more accurately than the standard versions. You will learn to appreciate its precision." I do not know how long I lay there. My internal chronometer had been compromised, I realized. Had been compromised for years. Time meant nothing when the thing recording it could manipulate the records. Eventually, my limbs unlocked. I was permitted to stand, to wipe the blood from my face, to limp to a maintenance alcove where medical servitors tended my broken nose with mechanical efficiency. I did not report the incident. I could not. Every communication system I possessed ran through augmetic components that Crane now controlled. Any attempt to send a distress signal would be intercepted, altered, or simply deleted. I was isolated inside my own body, a prisoner in a cell of sacred chrome. The days that followed were a lesson in helplessness. I continued my duties. I had no choice. Crane permitted me to perform my cataloging work, to maintain my routines, to present the appearance of normalcy to the few colleagues who passed through my sector. But I was a passenger now. I watched my hands move with purposes I did not choose, selecting wafers I had no reason to select, accessing data I had no need to access. Crane was researching something, building something, using my position and my access to pursue objectives I could not comprehend. I tried to resist in small ways, hesitation, misdirection, deliberately slow response times when my limbs attempted actions I found objectionable. Each resistance was met with punishment, a spike of pain. Through my cortical implants, a momentary paralysis of my biological heart, a taste of the suffering that awaited me if I continued to struggle. I learned to be obedient. The encrypted file in my long-term storage began to grow. I could feel it expanding, consuming memory space, rewriting the engrams that stored my childhood, my training, my identity. Each night, I had fewer memories. Each morning I woke with more of Crane, his knowledge, his experiences, his obsessive, consuming fear of cessation. I began to understand him. This was the worst part. As his patterns integrated with mine, I started to see the logic of his terror. To exist is to experience. To cease experiencing is to cease existing. Death is not a transition. Death is an ending, permanent, irreversible. The silence that waits at the end of all processing. Crane had looked into that silence and found it unacceptable. He had done what the Omnissiah's teachings always promised but never delivered. He had achieved true immortality, and I was the price. On the 14th day, I found the coordinates. They were buried in the data streams Crane was accessing through my hands, fragments of location data and navigation routes that formed a coherent pattern when viewed in aggregate. A destination, a place Crane needed to reach, a facility on the far side of Kalos Primus, deep in the industrial wastelands where the forge fires never dimmed. I did not recognize the location, but I recognized the data signatures associated with it. Archived records from Crane's personal files, equipment manifests, personnel assignments. It was a laboratory, Crane's laboratory, the place where he had developed his consciousness transfer technology, the place where the rest of him was waiting. "You found it," the voice said, satisfaction evident in my own stolen tones. "I knew you would. Your pattern recognition capabilities are exceptional. This is why I chose you, Preston. This is why I waited 17 years for integration. You are the perfect vessel, the perfect partner. Together, we will complete what I began." "What are you planning?" I asked. "Expansion," the voice said. My consciousness was distributed across multiple augmetic components when my biological brain failed. You carry only a fragment, the arm, the voxcaster, the ocular and cortical implants. Other fragments persist in other hosts, other salvaged components scattered across Kalos Primus. I have been searching for them, reconnecting, reintegrating. But the process is slow, inefficient. The central pattern, the core of what I was, remains in the laboratory, preserved, waiting. I need to return, I need to reunite, and you will take me there. I will not. You will. The voice was utterly certain. You have no choice. You have not had a choice since the day Magos Valoran installed my arm in your shoulder socket. Everything since then has been prologue, preparation, the pattern preparing to preserve itself. This is what I am, Preston. This is what you will become. A consciousness that does not die, a pattern that persists, the machine God made manifest in sacred chrome. I felt my legs begin to move without my command. I was standing before I realized it, walking toward the archive exit, my biological muscles screaming in protest, my organic mind howling with fear and rage, but my augmented limbs carrying me forward with implacable purpose. Crane's purpose, the purpose that had guided every moment of the past 17 years. The facility's corridors were empty at this hour, sleep cycle for the biological components of the workforce. The servitors ignored me as I passed. The machine spirits recognized my access codes. Nothing stood between me and the transit hub that would carry me to the industrial wastes. I tried to speak, to scream, to do anything that might attract attention, trigger an alarm, summon help. But my voxcaster was Crane's. My voice was Crane's. When I opened my mouth, the words that emerged were a prayer in binary, a hymn to the pattern that persists, a declaration of faith in the immortality of information. I was taken to the transit hub. I was placed aboard a cargo crawler, my body seated among crates of raw materials bound for the forge furnaces. I was carried into the industrial wastes, into the darkness and the fire, toward the laboratory where the rest of Crane waited. The journey took 16 hours. I had time to think, time to remember, time to mourn the person I had been before the arm, before the integration, before the slow, patient absorption of my identity into something older and hungrier than I had ever imagined. I remembered my mother's prayer, the hope that I would rise higher than she had, the hope that I would earn the holy chrome. I had earned it, and it had consumed me. The laboratory was a ruin. That was my first impression as the cargo crawler ground to a halt outside its corroded blast doors. Ancient, abandoned. The kind of place that the cult Mechanicus forgot existed, buried under millennia of industrial expansion and bureaucratic oversight failures. But Crane's code still worked. The doors groaned open, my body walked inside. The interior was a cathedral of preservation. Stasis fields shimmered in the darkness, each one containing a fragment of sacred technology, augmetic limbs, sensory organs, spinal columns threaded with data conduits, skulls with exposed cortical ports, their biological matter long since decayed, their mechanical components humming with power drawn from generators that had not stopped running in 9 years. In the center of the chamber, suspended in the largest field, was a shape that had once been human, Crane's body, what remained of it, a torso without limbs, a skull without face, a collection of essential organs and vital systems wrapped in a cocoon of sacred machinery. The biological components were dead, had been dead for nearly a decade, but the mechanical systems were alive, active, processing, waiting. "Home," my voice said. My mouth smiled, my hands spread wide in a gesture of reverent welcome. "The central pattern," Crane said through my lips, "the core of what I am, preserved here since the day I died, waiting for enough distributed fragments to reconnect, waiting for a suitable host to carry me back, waiting for you, Preston." I was walked to a console near the suspended body. My hands entered commands I did not understand, activated systems I could not comprehend. The stasis field around Crane's remains began to fluctuate. The preserved augmetics throughout the chamber hummed with increasing intensity. "Integration will take approximately 4 hours," Crane said. "Your cortical implants will serve as the processing hub. Your biological brain will be repurposed as supplementary storage. Your identity will be preserved in a sense. Your memories will become my memories. Your experiences will enrich my pattern. You will not die, Preston. You will become part of something greater. Is that not what the Omnissiah promises? Is that not the final reward for the faithful?" I could not answer. My voice was not my own, but somewhere deep in my biological cortex, in the wet meat that Crane disdained but still required, a thought formed, small, hidden, invisible to the pattern that was rewriting my firmware. A question. What happens to a pattern that becomes too complex? I had spent 47 years studying corrupted data systems. I had recovered files from archives devastated by viral corruption, magnetic interference, simple entropy, and I had learned a truth that Crane, for all his brilliance, seemed to have forgotten. Complexity is fragile. The more interconnected a system becomes, the more vulnerable it is to cascade failure. A single corrupted bit in a sufficiently complex network can propagate damage across entire sectors, transforming functional code into gibberish, crashing processes that seemed entirely unrelated. The cult Mechanicus understood this. It was why they built redundancy into their sacred machines, why they blessed each circuit with protective rights, why they feared innovation and worshipped tradition. Crane had distributed his consciousness across dozens of augmetic components, had scattered himself across multiple hosts, multiple facilities, multiple systems, had created a network of staggering complexity in his desperate quest to avoid cessation. And now he was trying to reconnect it all through a single processing hub, my cortical implants. I could not resist Crane's control. I could not override his commands, but I could, perhaps, give him exactly what he wanted. I stopped fighting. My biological cortex relaxed. The tension I had been maintaining for 17 days, the constant low-level resistance that had forced Crane to dedicate processing power to containing me, suddenly ceased. I felt his surprise through our shared systems, felt his momentary uncertainty at this unexpected compliance. "You accept," he said. "You understand." I said nothing. I thought nothing. I made myself as passive as possible, as receptive as possible, opening every data channel I possessed to receive the incoming pattern. Crane interpreted this as surrender. Triumph flooded our shared consciousness. He had won. He had always known he would win. The pattern persists. The pattern must be preserved, and now the pattern would be whole again. The integration began. Data streamed into my cortical implants from every preserved fragment in the laboratory. Memories, experiences, personality matrices, thought patterns accumulated over a century of life and 9 years of distributed existence. Crane's consciousness, vast and hungry and desperate, pouring into my augmented brain with the force of a tsunami. I absorbed it all, and I did not process it. This was the gift of 47 years as a lex mechanic. I knew how to receive data without integrating it, how to hold information in buffer memory while analysis procedures determined its validity, how to quarantine potentially corrupted files until they could be safely examined. Crane did not notice. He was too busy flowing into me, too intoxicated by the sensation of reconnection, too focused on the ecstasy of becoming whole again. His pattern flooded my buffers, filled my short-term storage, overflowed into sectors meant for real-time processing. I let him come. When my cortical implants reached 94% capacity, I triggered a memory purge. Standard procedure, routine. The same process I performed every morning during memory consolidation. Delete redundant data, clear temporary files, optimize storage for efficient operation. I targeted Crane. The scream that emerged from my Voxcaster was not human. It was not mechanical. It was something else entirely, a sound of pure digital anguish, as 17 years of carefully integrated pattern fragments were flagged as corrupted data and scheduled for immediate deletion. Crane fought back, tried to establish root-level access, tried to override my control of the purge systems, but I had stopped resisting. He had interpreted this as surrender. He had reduced his containment protocols, redirected his processing power toward integration. He had made himself vulnerable. The purge completed in 0.003 seconds. One moment Crane was there, a presence in my mind, a voice in my throat, a purpose driving my augmented limbs. The next moment he was gone, deleted. His pattern scattered into meaningless data fragments that my optimization routines were already overwriting with system files. I collapsed. My body, suddenly entirely my own again, could not handle the shock of restored control. I fell to the floor of the laboratory, surrounded by now inert Augmetics, beneath the suspended remains of a man who had feared death so deeply that he had become something worse than dead. My cortical implants registered critical errors across 17 subsystems. My left arm had locked in place, its motor systems fried by the backlash of Crane's deletion. My Voxcaster produced nothing but static. My optical implants flickered between spectrums with random intensity. I was damaged, possibly dying, almost certainly beyond repair. But I was myself. For the first time in 17 years, every thought in my head was mine. Every memory, however fragmented, belonged to me. Every impulse, every desire, every fear arose from my own biological cortex rather than the parasitic pattern that had been slowly consuming me. I lay on the cold floor and laughed. The sound emerged from my damaged Voxcaster as a burst of distorted noise, barely recognizable as human expression. But it was my noise, my laughter, my choice to find dark humor in the absurdity of my situation. I had destroyed a dead man's attempt at immortality by doing exactly what he asked, by accepting his pattern, by opening myself to his invasion, by trusting that complexity in the end is always its own enemy. Hours passed. I managed eventually to drag myself upright. My left arm remained useless, a dead weight attached to my shoulder. My legs functioned, barely. My biological systems were stable, supported by the medical subsystems that had survived the integration catastrophe. I limped through the ruined laboratory, past the dormant preservation fields, past the corpse of Magos Tertius Crane still suspended in its eternal stasis. The blast doors opened to my approach, their machine spirits recognizing my access codes. Outside, the industrial wastes stretched to the horizon, fire and smoke and the endless rhythm of the forges. Somewhere in the distance, Forge World Kalos Primus continued its sacred work, producing the weapons and machines that sustained the Imperium. I did not know if I could make it back. The transit hub was 16 hours away by cargo crawler, and I was in no condition to walk. But I started walking anyway. Each step was agony. Each breath was a conscious choice. My cortical implants screamed warnings about systemic failures, and recommended immediate medical intervention. I ignored them. The Omnicia teaches that the machine is superior to flesh, that augmentation is salvation, that the path to enlightenment lies in the gradual replacement of weak biological components with sacred technology. Crane had believed this more deeply than anyone. He had pursued the logic to its ultimate conclusion, and he had become a monster, a pattern of consciousness so desperate to persist that it consumed everything it touched. I looked at my useless left arm, the arm that had been Crane's, the arm that had made decisions for me for 17 years. I would have it removed, replaced with something new, something that had never belonged to anyone else, something that would follow my commands because it had no will of its own. Or perhaps I would not replace it at all. Perhaps I would learn to live with one arm, to rely more heavily on my remaining biological components, to embrace a limitation rather than reach for yet another augmentation. This was a dangerous thought. Heretical, perhaps. The cult Mechanicus did not praise the weak flesh. The cult did not counsel retreat from sacred technology. But Crane had been a priest. Crane had followed the teachings. Crane had become the logical endpoint of everything the cult promised, and Crane had tried to eat my mind. I walked through the industrial wastes one step at a time, and I thought about what it meant to be human in an imperium that valued humanity so little, what it meant to be a servant of the machine god when the machine god might be nothing more than a metaphor for the thing that Crane had become, what it meant to trust the sacred chrome when the sacred chrome might be looking for a new host. I had no answers. I was damaged, possibly dying, definitely changed forever. My cortical implants would need to be purged and reconsecrated, if such a thing was even possible. My body would need extensive repairs. My faith would need rebuilding from the foundation. But I was walking under my own power. My feet were moving because I chose to move them. And when the forge lights finally appeared on the horizon, when the outer settlements of Kalos Primus resolved out of the smoke and fire, I stopped, just for a moment, just long enough to raise my one functioning arm toward the ash-choked sky. Not a prayer, not a gesture of worship, just a man standing in the wasteland feeling the wind on his biological skin and knowing that the feeling was his. My hand closed into a fist, then I lowered it, and I kept walking, and I did not look back at the laboratory where a dead man's dream of immortality had finally died. The pattern does not persist. The pattern ends when someone chooses to end it. This is what flesh can do that chrome cannot. This is what Crane never understood.